Look, the board is officially lit up, and I'm ready to move some pieces. Sunday morning, May 3rd, 2026, and I'm Dan Miller, your Director of Business Development.
And I'm Buck Reynolds. This seat feels a lot harder after a long week of watching the diesel ticker. But let's get into it.
This is Jules Sterling, ready to find the silver lining in whatever chaos Dan's about to throw at us today. Right?
Elena Rossi here. The operations room is humming, and we have some significant structural shifts to analyze, especially on the border.
Look, here's the play. Yesterday, we were breaking down that US-EU tariff blowout and the Spirit Airlines liquidation. Buck was basically mourning the low-cost model. But today, we have an action-packed show focused on the physical ground game. We're talking about the El Paso border surge and a massive, a very solid shift in the LTL markets that's going to catch some people off guard.
It's sort of a different vibe from yesterday, right? Yesterday was all macro-political, but today feels like the practical fallout, especially with those CVSA Roadcheck fears we touched on coming home to roost in the pricing data.
Actually, it's a direct continuation. If you aren't watching the nearshoring infrastructure in Mexico, you're missing the reason why our domestic rates are suddenly exploding.
Look, you're spot on. Let's lead with the dirt. Dallas developer Formation Interests, they just broke ground on something called Form 375 at Paso del Norte. And honestly, this is the chess move of the decade for El Paso.
Here's the deal. El Paso's been a bottleneck since I was double clutching a Peterbilt in the 90s. So what's another warehouse going to do?
It's not just another warehouse, Buck. We are talking 800,000 square feet of industrial muscle right across four buildings.
Which are being marketed as zero-distance logistics. Right, Dan?
Exactly. Look, the flagship is a 513,000 square foot cross-dock facility. And the kicker is the location. It is directly adjacent to the Zaragoza port of entry.
Oh, wow. So you're basically on the fence, you know? You cross the line from Juarez and you are basically in the bay?
You're in the end zone before the defense even wakes up. Look, in a region where border delays can easily hit 2 or 3 hours, being right there means you bypass the drayage congestion that kills your HOS.
My thing is, who's filling it? You build a 500,000 square foot cross-dock, you need high-volume freight to justify that kind of footprint.
It's the high-power users, Buck. We're talking semiconductors, AI-related manufacturing, medical devices. These aren't just cheap widgets anymore. This is the high-tech shift we've been predicting, and honestly, it's turning El Paso into a Silicon Valley with more dust.
It's sort of persuasive when you look at the vacancy rates, right? I mean, I was looking at a report from the region, and vacancy is what? Sub 3%?
Which is functionally zero in logistics terms. If you don't have space locked in now, you're basically playing a defensive game with no bench.
I suppose that's where the zero-distance branding comes in, right? It's a premium play.
It's a shutout play. Look, if you control the facility at the Zaragoza Gate, you control the flow for the most sophisticated supply chains in North America.
Here's the deal. You still have to get the trucks across the bridge. I don't care how close the warehouse is if the bridge is backed up to Mexico City because the scanners are down.
Actually, Buck, that's where the Manzanillo news comes in.
The port of Manzanillo? That's the other side of the country.
You see, Hutchison Ports Timsa, they're a huge operator down there. They just dumped over 300 million pesos into electric cranes.
That's a lot of pesos.
It's about $18 million, Dan. 2 high-capacity electric cranes, part of a larger modernization effort.
Look, it's a coordinated offense. Raw materials and chips hit Manzanillo from Asia. They get railed or trucked to the border, assembled in Juarez, and then they hit that new Form 375 facility in El Paso for final distribution.
So the electric cranes are the front of the funnel?
Precisely. Manzanillo is seeing a record surge because of the China Plus One strategy. If the port is clogged, the Juarez factories starve, and the El Paso warehouses sit empty.
Electric cranes. I bet they don't even have a backup generator that works when the grid in Colima gets flaky.
Buck, you are such a Luddite.
I'm not a Luddite. I'm a realist. You give me a diesel engine, and I can fix it with a paperclip. You give me an electric crane with a firmware glitch, and you got 1,000 containers sitting on a boat for 3 days.
Well, okay, but the environment? The fuel savings? It's gotta help the bottom line for the port operators, right?
Actually, Jules, it's about throughput. Electric units have higher uptime and faster cycle times than legacy diesel units, when they're maintained correctly. TIMSA is betting $18 million that the spring surge we're seeing in manufacturing isn't a fluke.
Look, it's not a fluke. It's the USMCA review in 2026. Every major manufacturer is trying to get their infrastructure bulletproofed before the politicians start renegotiating the deal.
My thing is, we're building all this for the new breed of freight, the chips and the AI stuff, but we still have a shortage of the guys who can actually back a trailer into those fancy new docks.
It's sort of a build it and they will come strategy. But who is they?
They are the carriers who can survive the current rate environment, Jules.
Well, speaking of surviving, before we get into the absolute bloodbath, or, well, the spring explosion, as I'm calling it, in the LTL markets, I want to take a second for a quick word.
Right. Because look, strategic logistics, especially this high-tech nearshoring we're talking about, it really requires world-class engineering.
This show is powered by The Stack, developed by Eric Christensen at Neural Network Media. He's the architect behind the code that keeps us on the air.
Look, you have to support the people who build the tools. Visit our Patreon at patreon.com/Neural Network Media for a free trial. You get access to our daily briefing PDF, which, honestly, has all the Manzanillo data we're looking at right now.
It's good data, even if I don't like the electric cranes.
Check it out. Support Eric. Now, let's get to the real street fight.
All right, let's pivot to the LTL market. I've been looking at the transactional data from the last 48 hours, and I suppose we have reached a structural inflection point.
Here we go! The spring surge!
Wait, is it actually a surge? I mean, January and February were pretty, sluggish?
They were worse than sluggish, Jules. January was down 1.7%. February was down 1.2% year over year. People were starting to think the LTL market was in a permanent deep freeze.
But then March hit. A 7% jump? And look, the Traffic's Q2 update that just dropped, they're saying North American freight has officially turned the corner.
7% in 1 month?
Actually, it's higher now. Early May bids are coming in with double-digit increases. Transactional data shows LTL rates are being priced 12.5% higher than this time last year.
Oh, look, that's a massive, it's a major touchdown play. 12.5%.
My thing is, why now? Is it actually more freight moving? Or are the carriers just finally realizing they can't pay their bills at last year's prices?
It's a perfect storm, Buck. You have recovering industrial demand. Think of those chips heading to El Paso, plus a localized diesel shock. But the big one? The capacity index dropped below 40 this week, according to the Logistics Managers Index.
Below 40. Look, that's the danger zone for shippers. When the index hits 40, it means the power has shifted completely back to the carriers.
So XPO and Knight-Swift, they're the ones holding the cards now?
XPO just reported their Q1 results, and look, they're seeing massive yield growth. They've integrated those 28 terminals they bought from the Yellow auction, and honestly, They're sitting in the catbird seat right now.
Here's the deal. I saw those XPO numbers. Their pricing discipline is just a fancy way of saying they're kicking the low-margin guys off the trucks to make room for the big spenders.
It's strategic, Buck. In a market where the LMI Transportation Price Index is at its highest level since 2022, you'd be a fool to take filler freight.
But what about the small retail accounts? The yoga mat shippers of the world? I mean, if rates are up 30% in some lanes, which is what Traffics is reporting, they are going to be absolutely crushed, right?
They are. Traffics' bear case actually calls for these double-digit increases to hold through the rest of 2026.
The rest of the year?
If industrial production continues to trend upward, there is simply not enough LTL capacity to absorb it, especially with the yellow-sized holes still in the market.
Look, it's like a season-ending injury for the shippers who didn't lock in contract rates. If you're playing on the spot market for LTL right now, you are basically donating your margins to the carrier's fuel fund.
My thing is, I don't trust these spring surges. We've seen them before. One little hiccup in the manufacturing data, and these rates will settle back down like a flat tire.
I suppose that's possible, Buck. But the capacity numbers don't lie. You see, carriers aren't adding trucks. They're just, maximizing the ones they have.
So even if the demand stays flat, the lack of new trucks keeps the rates high?
Exactly. And when you factor in the CVSA Roadcheck coming up, the zero tolerance for ELD tampering we talked about yesterday, we're going to see even more capacity sidelined.
Look, it's a pincer move. You've got nearshoring pulling freight from the south, industrial demand pushing from the Midwest, and the DOT squeezing the bad actors out of the driver pool.
You make it sound like a military operation, Dan.
It is. Logistics is war with a different uniform. Look, the bottom line is, if you aren't quote-unquote paying the piper now, you aren't going to have a truck in June.
I was looking at the XPO yield numbers again. They're up significantly. They're focusing on service-centric pricing.
Which is just expensive pricing, right?
Actually, Jules, it's predictable pricing. In this market, a shipper will pay 20% more for a guarantee that the truck actually shows up at the dock.
It's the consistency play we were talking about yesterday. The Delta model. Look, people want the safe bet. They don't want to gamble on a maybe when they have $1 million in AI chips sitting in an El Paso warehouse.
I'd rather have $1 million in diesel. It's easier to move.
Only you, Buck.
It's sort of fascinating. You know, we've spent 2 years in a freight recession, and now it feels like the rubber band is finally snapping back.
It's not just snapping. It's reshaping the whole landscape. Between the electric infrastructure in Manzanillo and the LTL rate spikes, we're seeing a more, consolidated and expensive industry.
Look, it's the Elite Eight. Only the big, tech-savvy players are going to survive this hike. The mom-and-pop shops that can't track metadata for the CVSA or can't afford the 30% rate jump on the spot market, they're the ones who are going to be relegated.
Relegated to what? The scrapyard?
Basically. Look, here's the play for Monday morning. If you're a broker, you better be talking to your shippers today. Don't wait until their freight is sitting on a dock with no carrier to pick it up.
It's sort of about managing expectations, right? Delivering the bad news before it becomes a catastrophe.
Actually, I'd call it risk mitigation. A late shipment is a claim waiting to happen. An expensive shipment is just a line item in the budget.
My thing is, if the rates are up 12%, my drivers better be seeing a 12% bump in their paychecks. But I won't hold my breath.
Look, that's the next battle, Buck. The labor market is going to react to this surge. And honestly, that's when it gets really interesting.
Well, I suppose that's our reality check for this Sunday.
Actually, it's more of a warning. The spring surge is here, and the data says it's sticking.
Look, bottom line, stay locked in. We're watching the LTL bids this week, and if they cross 15%, well, we might be looking at a whole new ballgame.
Here's the deal for you fleet managers and owner-ops. Check your tire pressure and check your logs. If you're hauling these high-rate LTL loads, the inspectors are going to be looking at you twice as hard.
And keep those lines of communication open, right? Relationship freight is the only thing that survives a volatile market.
Precision is the only thing that survives an audit. Watch your following distance and your HOS.
Look, watch the El Paso border crossings. That's where the volume's heading. See you on the high road.
I'm heading out to the garden. My roses are the only things that don't ask me for a fuel surcharge. Safe travels out there.
Stay compliant.
See you tomorrow.
Let's get it.